So Wednesday, we had 19 people at Bible study. 19 people. And 8 of them were children from the ages of, I don't know, like elementary school to middle school. And like this congregation today, most of them were newish people. I hope I didn't scare Cynthia off by introducing her to everyone, because she's been coming the last couple weeks and now she's not here. I introduced her and now she's not here. Oh man! But and we have someone that comes that doesn't come to church. I'd like to know that story. But she's very vocal and participates, and is a great. She's been there every week. So. If you're interested in, and we feed you, or someone feeds you, my wife made white chicken chili. Chicken chili, yeah. I got those in order. And there's a sign up in the back if you're interested in providing some sort of meal, and then other people bring drinks or other things that complement the meal. I was a little concerned because, remember, it rained really hard on Wednesday night. But boy, we had a really, really good show. Now, we're doing a wonderful Bible study that Karen had picked out. And it's about the contextual, it's the context of Jesus' time here on earth. So it provides very good context, cultural context, for the messages that we then study. And the layout is we watch a video about the culture one week, and then the next week, I put on the website the scriptures that we're going to talk about. So then that way you're not like, what do you think about the scripture? I was like, well, I just read it. So, so go to our website, which is dunscreek.cc. If you scroll all the way to the bottom, also there's a bulletin on there. If you scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll see Wednesday night, and you'll have a list of all the scriptures that we're going to be talking about this Wednesday night. And for those of you who are new here, or if you've been here a couple weeks and you didn't know this, we are an interdenominational church. And I come from, I worked 8 years at an interdenominational church. Well, I don't like to use the word non for a couple of reasons. Mainly, it's negative. How do you describe yourself and what you're not? That's weird logic. I don't like that. Plus, we have many faiths here. So now when I was hired, I told them, look, man, if you picked one, it's a lot easier. If you pick one, it's so much easier because you have to know every faith, and you got to walk that plumb line of Christ. And that any dogmatic expressions or indoctrinations has to fall away. We just got to find the plumb line of Christ. Amen. Now this week, we've been doing a discipleship series all summer. And each part of the discipleship series, there's little tiny subsections. This is a subsection, and it's called For the Long Haul. So the first of a 4-part series, and this one's talking about the burden of our day. For today's text, we're encountering the Israelites post-Exodus. This is after they've been led out of Egypt. And they're having some trouble remembering some recent history of their past. Not ancient memories. I mean, things that just happened. They're having a hard time remembering what just happened. But first, whenever I dig into the Old Testament, I really like to start with, where and when are we in this book? I mean, where and when are we specifically? Well, the last time we were in Exodus, we talked about Moses and his call before he went back to Egypt. And we covered about how he affirmatively responded to God, and he was provided a vocation. And then there was this, well, I'm not really, this is what I see. I see myself as a sinner, Lord. And then we talked about what God sees. And finally, it's like an acceptance to God's call. And he's got this. Whatever he's going to put you in front of, he's got it. You just got to be obedient. And then from there, Moses goes back to Egypt, if you guys remember the story. And he leads the Israelites out of slavery, and it's kind of messy with Pharaoh, and included the first Passover. And then in Exodus in chapter 14, we have this miraculous crossing of the Red Sea, and Pharaoh's chariots get swallowed up in there. So then in chapter 15, there's this song of Moses, which I'm kind of interested in how it went, being a musician. And I wonder what it sounded like. And at the end of chapter 15, we have the Israelites, and they're complaining about Moses, and they're complaining about Aaron, about their circumstances. And the Lord provides fresh water, the Lord provides fresh food, and He provides protection. And that brings us to today's text. And we learn from the text that it's been exactly 1 month since the Exodus has begun. So I invite you to read along in your Bibles. It'll be on the PowerPoint as well. We're turning to Exodus chapter 16, verse 2 through 15. Hear the word of the Lord. The whole congregation of the Israelites complained against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the Israelites said to them, "If only we had died at the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots and ate our fill of bread. For you have brought us into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with our hunger." Then the Lord said to Moses, I am going to rain bread from heaven for you, and each day the people shall go out and gather enough for that day. In that way, I will test them, whether they will follow my instructions or not. On the 6th day, when they prepare what they bring in, it'll be twice as much as they gather on other days. So Moses and Aaron said to the Israelites, "In the evening y'all shall know that it was the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall see the glory of the Lord, because He has heard your complaining against the Lord. For what are we that you complain against us?" And Moses said, "When the Lord gives you meat to eat in the evening and your fill of bread in the morning, because the Lord has heard the complaining that you utter against Him. What are we? Your complaining is not against us, but against the Lord." Then Moses said to Aaron, "Say to the whole congregation of the Israelites, draw near to the Lord, for He has heard your complaining." And as Aaron spoke to the whole congregation of the Israelites, they looked toward the wilderness, and the glory of the Lord appeared in a cloud. The Lord spoke to Moses and said, "I have heard the complaining of the Israelites. Say to them, at twilight you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall have your fill of bread. Then you shall know that I am the Lord your God." In the evening, quails came up and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When that layer of dew lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness was a fine, flaky substance, as fine as the frost on the ground. And when the Israelites saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat." Brothers and sisters, this is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Father in heaven, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing in your sight, my Lord, my rock, Redeemer. So what's going on? Well, we got these hungry people. And most of them are seriously hungry. About a month, okay? Families. Now think about this. Families, livestock. Everyone was growing thinner. I probably could use that diet. I'm not asking, but... And if something wasn't going to be done soon, they're going to die. And now, everyone was grumbling. Everyone's complaining. As I mentioned to the kids, 7 times in this short text, we read complaining. We should have died last month back in Egypt. Now we're starving. Which leads to my first point of today's message. Number one, there's a lot of complaining going on here. A lot. And it makes me wonder when I read this text. I got to be careful what I say because this is state dime. But I go through my text on Monday, and by Tuesday I'm pretty much got a good idea where the Lord wants me to go with this. And I'm wondering, what are they really hungry for? The Lord already provided them. Just the previous chapter provided them everything they need. It was bitter water, threw stick in it, now it's not bitter. Everything they need, the Lord is providing, yet they still complain. It's because they're complaining about what they want. They're complaining because they can't recognize that the Lord is already sending them exactly what they need, what they prayed for. They're short-sighted. They didn't know that this was their new reality. How long did the Israelites wander eating this manna? Come on, biblical scholars, how long was this? Say it again, say it loud. 40 years! This was their reality. They're going to be in the desert for 40 years. The Lord is not only providing their current needs, but He's also providing what they're going to need in the future as well. But still, they're complaining and complaining and complaining. And say it with me. And complaining. And come. 7 times in this short text. And if you go through the previous text, there's still more complaining. Why? Why are they complaining? Leads to my second point. Because they have false memories. They have false memories. Here comes from some psychological babble. A phenomenon called false memory syndrome. It's a real thing. And it's apparent recollection of an event that didn't actually occur. And it happens more than you think. Like, for instance, I don't know if you got any siblings and you're like, hey, remember when mom and dad did this? And the other one's like, no, they didn't do that. Anyone ever have that? Or you went on a vacation. We didn't go on that vacation. Or here's a very common one, clinically, is being lost in the mall or being lost somewhere. That's a very common false memory. Or here's another one that happens every day. You think you locked the door, but you didn't. Mine, that happens quite often, is I leave the cupboards open. And my wife kept telling me, you leave the cupboard. I don't do that. No, I don't. And then one day, I was home alone, and I walked to the kitchen, and I promise you, I thought I had a poltergeist because every cupboard was open. And then I go, maybe I do that. And another very common one is how many people went to Woodstock in 1969? You guys laugh because they know. Because according to the accounts, it was millions of people went to Woodstock in 1999, right? 1969. But actually, it was only about 250,000. Well, why was there millions of people? Well, because there was a movie about Woodstock, and apparently back in 1969, the drugs were very intense. So if you took drugs and you went to this movie, it felt like you were there. That's a true story about this. A true story. And I learned about this syndrome in forensic psychology when I took that, which has turned out to be very helpful working at a prison and a church. Because it involves misremembering details of a crime scene after being influenced by like a leading prosecutor, someone that's whispering in their ears. Remember he said this? No, he didn't. But, yeah, he did say that. Trial lawyers do it. Criminals do it. Now, misremembering means that you're aware of it. If you do, that's called false memory syndrome. I think it means that you're not aware of it. Excuse me. Misremembering means you don't know that you're doing it. You don't know that you're doing it. It's called false memory syndrome. Another reason you could be doing it is to save face. The technical psychological term of that is called self-preservation. Now, the ones who know that they're doing it, that's called gaslighting. The results are the same. What you're doing is you're creating this narrative based on events that just aren't true or never happened. This is what's happening in today's text. Let me bring it back to the text. This is exactly what's happening. So when I'm on Monday or Tuesday, I go, yep, they're doing a false memory. That's what's happening. They're forgetting 4 or 6 weeks ago, they were just slaves back in Egypt. And it said back in verse 3, back in Egypt, when they sat by the pots of meat and ate our fill of bread. Flesh pots. They sat. What's all that about? Well, scholars say that that's a big pot of simmering meat. But what did they eat? They ate bread. They sat by the pots. Did they eat the meat? They didn't eat meat. They ate bread. And they didn't get any of it. They're like, oh, remember when we didn't get any meat? But we had our fill of bread. That memory was better than their current reality, according to them. Silly, isn't it? It's silly. Was it? I mean, they're starving at this point. Was it really better? If we dig into the text, we know that's not true. Because the Lord says, I'm going to do something new. First of all, I'm going to let it rain bread. He's like out there, making it rain bread. Here we go. Which leads to my third point. God, this is a more scholarly way of saying this, God provides it in unusual ways. Raining bread's pretty weird. I mean, that's pretty weird. And then the Israelites were given very specific instructions. There was bread in the morning and quail and meat at night. Wait, what? There was bread in the morning and quail meat at night. They had quail meat now. And all they had to do was to collect for 5 days all that they need. And on the 6th day, collect twice as much. And if you read further in the text, it goes into specific details of what happened after that. And the reason for this, why were they only to collect 5 days what they needed in 6 days double? Why? 7th day of rest, to honor the Sabbath. Don't collect on the Sabbath. So not only did God provide what they needed, he provided in covenant. He provided in how they needed it. This provision was a partnership with his people. And it was a test. He said, I'm going to test you to see if you could follow instructions. Which leads to our fourth point. God provides in partnership. He's going to provide us our sustenance. And it's our responsibility to gather and share. He provides, we gather and share. He provides, we don't provide. He provides, we gather and share. That's our response to his provision. And yet still, as you read you read the rest of the story, because they didn't follow instructions. Imagine that. Some, on the wrong days, collected too much, and they tried to hoard it. And then by the morning, it was wormy and rotten, and when the sun hit it, it melted. That's in verses 20 to 21. Why? Because they collected it on the Sabbath. Or they collected too much. They didn't follow very specific instructions. I give the students very specific instructions just to see if they can follow them. And if they can't follow instructions, I'm not going to enroll them. Because if you can't follow instructions, you're the problem. Which leads to our fifth point. Follow instructions. Everything's a test. I tell this to my students all the time. You can go and leave early if you want, but I'm watching who leaves. Everything's a test. I want to see who wants it. Some Israelites were either unwilling or incapable. It's like that false memory syndrome. Were they conscious of it? I don't know. The result's the same. Now, another translation, it depends on what translation you have, but if you get closer to a different translation, verse 4 is, so that I can test them to see whether or not they will walk by my law. I'm testing them to see if they can follow my law. Very simple, very specific instructions. It's a test to not only see if they could follow instructions, it's a test to see, to test their hearts. To see if their hearts were the type of heart to be inclined to be covenant people. So how'd they do? Well, we talked about it. Some gathered too much, some tried to hoard it, some collected on the Sabbath. So not only are they not following these instructions, they're breaking commandment. Does anyone know which commandment? The fourth. Does anyone know what fourth commandment is? Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. No wonder they were complaining so much. They didn't have rest in the Father. They never stopped to hear his silent voice, and all they heard was their own. Rules are in place for a reason, and we mustn't pick and choose which ones we want to follow because we think it suits our own temporal needs. I've known pastors, I've known church leaders who willingly break this commandment. There's always an excuse, one that they've justified. But isn't that how sin works? Isn't that how covenant breaking works? It's no different than someone cheating on a spouse. You're cheating on God. And it's hard when you're in the ministry. I mean, I've been in ministry 12 years. I've seen a lot of crazy things. And you've got to honor, and you've got to protect your Sabbath when you're in ministry. And I've learned the hard way, because ministry never stops. You're never done. I talked to Deb about this last week, or the week before last. Ministry work's never complete. You're always doing ministry work, so you have to learn to stop. And I was very clear when I started here back last July. I'm not available from Friday night until Sunday after the service. I'm not. Unless it's a spiritual or physical emergency. If someone got in an accident and life and death situation, or I need to be by someone's deathbed, I need to know that. And I've learned this a long time ago. Now, at the Village Church, which was another interdenominational church, the office staff, we had pastors, I was one of 4 pastors. We would protect everybody's Sabbath because we all had different Sabbath days. So we didn't line up. Because Sunday's not a Sabbath day. I'm working, folks. This is not my day of rest. Oh, and incidentally, I'll do this for free. I've done it for free for years. I get paid because I have to deal with the nonsense. And sometimes I wonder if it's worth it. Preaching, though, is a calling. Music's a calling. I do that for free. I've done it for free for 20 years, 30 years. I'm old. You ever reached that threshold where you kept saying 20 years, then realized it's 30 years? I reached that threshold. It's actually 35 years. I'm old. And when I worked there, I worked full-time up there. I took Fridays and Saturdays off. Friday was a soft day off, and then Saturday was my day off. But having 2 days off while working at the prison is just not realistic with a bivocational pastor. Yet, pretty simple instructions, yet people seem to be surprised when I stand my ground and I instruct my conviction of honoring my Sabbath. And I'll tell you right now, my biggest mistakes in ministry were made on a day I should have been honoring my Sabbath, Saturday. Because I need rest, and so do you. Why is it so hard for the Israelites to follow these simple instructions? Why is it so hard for us to follow simple instructions? Maybe it's because we never want to be hungry ever again. Maybe it's because we're trying to grasp onto everything we could find. Because we're trying to fill the emptiness in our soul, an emptiness that can only be satisfied with a day of rest with the Father. Or maybe we really don't understand how relying on God really works. It does take practice. Yet even through it, we complain and complain and complain. Maybe for months. Maybe for years. Maybe for decades. Yet, God's still going to provide. God's going to provide through our bickering and our backbiting and our not trusting and our being tested. God provides. All we have to do is follow instructions, very simple instructions, and we've got to trust. Maybe that's the biggest problem then and today. Maybe we just don't know how to trust. Which is weird because isn't God doing all the heavy lifting? Rain from heaven. Raining bread, who does that? God does. You don't know my God. For a year and a half, I was telling the prison, I need another building. Well, that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. Not only do we have another building coming, we have 2 academic instructors. We have a 3rd one coming that's going to offer HVAC. We're going to have a library, and we're going to have a CTE program. So for me asking and then tell them, you don't know my God in a state institution, after 18 months of me saying that, the state is throwing almost $750,000 to my direction to manage, and a continual budget of almost $500,000. Because I said, don't tell me, my God's pretty big. He can make it happen. Now, out of campus of about 400 inmates, about 150 of them are going to be able to do something with their lives. Because I don't hear your complaining at all. This is what I hear. We're called into obedience. And when we're obedient, guess what? God's on the move. When the church is obedient and we get out of the way, God is on the move. When the community is obedient, God is on the move. And if we're not obedient, we suffer the consequences, like moldy bread. If the church is not obedient, the church also suffers the consequences. Here are lots of stories, a history of God's people that are not following very specific instructions. Today, we just learned about one of them. And if a community, like we got individual, church, community, like larger sense community, if they're not obedient, well, who the heck wants to live there? I don't want to live there. We live in a community here in Putnam County, and where for the most part, oh, my motorcycles are calling me. You hear that? I'm waiting for money. I'm waiting for that rain to clear me in. Yes, it's a motorcycle community as well, and some of them are Christian riders. But we live in a community here in Putnam County where, for the most part, there's many people obedient to God. And that's one of the reasons my family loves it here. We're a county of God-fearing people, and we truly are a city on our knees, like that song says. And it's apparent through our shared ministries. And I see this volunteering through Hope FM. I see community involvement. I see who's plugged in to the community. And I see who's not. And when tragedy strikes, through a very dark moment this week in our community of believers, we all came together as a community to pray, to worship, to love on people. Now, my wife and I, of course, we were here for our Bible study. Thursday night, we had to go out of town. We turned the radio off, and we prayed like a little vigil in our car. And what I've witnessed this past week was these many people of faith. There was no Baptist, there was no Catholic, there was no Methodist, there was no Presbyterian, there was no Reformed, there was no non-denominational. There was people of God loving on people of God. And isn't that what we're supposed to be? Can we stop the nonsense and just move forward already? We're people of God loving on people of God. Amen? says so the word of the Lord and these people. And if you can't do that, we'll love you from a distance. I will pray for you, but maybe this is not your church. Because when you leave, scores will come. Because you don't know my God. As we examine our walk today, you know, the Bible's best used as a mirror, right? Not a window. As we examine our walk today, are we doing a lot of complaining like the Israelites? What are our false memories? Memories about the past? Or are we just gaslighting? Are we fantasizing about the good old days? Even those days probably weren't good or that old. Did we forget that not too long ago we were just in Egypt eating bread with no meat? God bless you. Are we still living in this past with false memories? Or are we going to do what the Lord wants us to do today? Today, He's providing very specific instructions in which we share ministry with Him. Remember, what are we supposed to do? Gather and share. That's it. He provides. What are we supposed to do? Gather and share. Are we supposed to provide? No. Who provides? What are we supposed to do? Gather and share. Stop trying to provide, because you can't provide anything. And the truth of the matter is, we're just like the Israelites. We don't know what we need. The Lord provides bread from heaven. Now this becomes from this text, it becomes a very specific theme of Scriptures that not only refers to the manna substance, but Christ Himself, in which we'll be receiving today. Any hungers that we have, any burdens of our day, Christ Himself has made available to fill our needs. So, church, today, are we going to grumble and complain about what the Lord Himself has provided? Or are we going to choose to accept God's partnership and do our part, which is gather and trust? No, so gather and share and trust. Thanks be to God. As I mentioned, today is Communion Sunday, so we're going to take a few minutes of silence to collect our thoughts, ask forgiveness to God for the transgressions that you have made against Him and His people, and we're going to go to the Lord.